Good afternoon. We're going to go ahead and get started. I want to just first off welcome everybody and thank you for coming. We know this was kind of something we put out just at the very quickly. It went out quickly and the response was unbelievable. So I'm sure many of you have heard we've added a second training this week. So I know I see a lot of familiar faces in the room, some faces I don't recognize. So I want to go ahead and just introduce ourselves so you know who we are. My name is Shauna Harney. I'm the Executive Director of Leadership and Learning, and with me I have all of our secondary consultants. So again, we want to thank you for joining us this afternoon. As you can see, this is being filmed, and our reason behind that is there's a lot of other folks who couldn't be here, and we want to be able to use this at the school and district level moving forward. So Chris Kendall is filming this for us. But a little bit of background before we get into why we're here, what we're doing, and your actual learning for the day. So background with this, you all have heard about our Plan of Excellence visits and the feedback that we're giving schools as we go in and make those Plan of Excellence visits. So that really kind of came from this. Our goal was to add teachers eventually in this process, and we're here. And prior to us beginning these visits at the school levels, we did a lot of calibration training here at the district level. So we know that principals and assistant principals are used to being in classrooms and giving feedback as it relates to instruction. But depending on the role of the administrator here at the district level, not always are those folks involved in providing instructional feedback, depending on what their role is. So we intentionally did some calibration sessions leading up to some of those Plan of Excellence visits where we were all making sure we were speaking the same language, knowing what our purpose was when we go in to make these visits. And the purpose really is to give feedback based on that snapshot in time. So we're in your school and a team is going in and observing instruction in the math department, and we're identifying strengths. Here's what we saw today that stood out to us across the board consistently as strengths, and here's some areas that we saw in this snapshot that you may consider as areas to continue to grow with. So just that we're speaking the same language, that we're all working on the same page. So that was really successful, and the purpose of that was for those visits, but what came out of those meetings were some real powerful conversations with the folks involved in those meetings. We've also been doing a lot of intentional calibrating still with our administrators. We know how important it is for you as teachers that your administrators are on the same page, and that when they're in your classrooms and we're giving feedback, whether it's a reinforce or a recommend, that it's so important that that's consistent. So we've also been doing that more intentionally with principals and assistant principals in some of our principal meetings. And so bringing teachers on board is the next phase, and of course we wanted to provide the same type of opportunity experience for you all to understand the purpose of these visits. But I think more importantly, our goal is that you walk away today and you're learning, oh wow, I can make this adjustment in my classroom tomorrow, or this makes sense to me now with maybe some feedback that you just received last week from one of your administrators. So our purpose is to help you understand what your role as a teacher would be if you were a part of one of these visits, making a Plan of Excellence visit, but also really just furthering your learning, your professional growth as a teacher as it relates to quality instruction. So that's kind of our purpose today, and we hope to expand this and grow this. There's another training we've already expanded Thursday. It was a good problem when we had over 100 teachers sign up in less than 48 hours. That's very positive, and that says a lot about the mindset of teachers in the district in terms of wanting to grow and hungry for knowledge. So this is something we know as we're at where we are now in this school year. We only have a few more scheduled visits. So this will be something, if you're not necessarily on a visit this school year, this is going to continue to grow and evolve next year. There's only really 3 other visits scheduled this year for those schools and certain tiers, and then some of those schools have requested visits, and that's going to look a little different. But our point today is to help you understand, if you were assigned a role this year or next year, what's your role on that team look like, sound like, but truly beyond that, hopefully that this is just going to further your learning, regardless of your role, regardless of your level, as it relates to the quality indicators of instruction.
Welcome, everybody. We're going to dive in with the targets for this session. So right in front of me is the target. I'd ask you to take a moment to just read the target to yourself, please. Could I have a volunteer to read that target aloud to the group? Nice and loud. Yes, thanks, Adrian.
Collaborate towards a common understanding of quality instruction and provide focused feedback to improve instructional practice.
Since what you read to yourself and you just heard Adrienne read for you, that is going to ground the entire next hour and 15 minutes, however much time we have. So is there any language, phrasing, anything in there that you would have a question about to get your bearings before we dive in? Don't be shy. Any question or comment about any of the key phrases? Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to take you through about 5 parts. You'll be very active, you'll be engaged in doing a lot of things, but we have all the paper for you as long as you brought a writing utensil. So you're getting the first piece of information now, and then Missy will share with you how we do the beginning part of this process.
Okay. So in front of you, hopefully at this point, you have the handout that's titled Criteria for Accurately Recording Descriptive Evidence. This sheet, I'm not going to read it to you, but the purpose for this sheet is to actually explain what is descriptive evidence, what does it look like. Hopefully for everybody in this room, you've all gotten a walk form and noticed that on the left-hand side of the form, there's lots of lines and there's lots of scripting there from your principal or administrator. And what we want to do is just to talk about what is accurately recorded descriptive evidence. And the fact of the matter is it's very specific, it's very accurate, it's an evidence-based record of what's actually happening in the classroom. Where we came from was a district that actually had a lot of narrative on what principals were seeing in the classrooms, and it would say something like, nice job. Well, for teachers, that wasn't very helpful for you. Nice job with what? What was I doing that made something positive happen in my classroom? Well, what descriptive evidence allows is for us to actually write exactly what's happening in the classroom. And this form actually gives you some helpful hints that after many, many months of us learning how to script and what does it look like to script, and then rolling this out over a course of a couple of years, things that we have learned over time to help with the scripting process. Because for many of you in this room, you've probably never scripted before. So what is it to actually do the scripting? After you think about it being, if it's an evidence-based record, what are some of the things that you can do? Well, you'll notice in that first section it says using T or S. T or S is a really easy way for you to record the teacher is saying or the student is saying. A lot of times people are using other abbreviations like CR for choral response or things of that nature. But what we don't want to happen in that section is for you to get those summary statements. Again, those big, just clunky statements to say, teacher was having students read. Well, what were the students reading? Was it appropriate? Was it something from a particular passage? Like, for example, you're going to see a video later that has To Kill a Mockingbird. In that video, it would be, in that descriptive evidence, it would be perfectly natural from that video to say, teacher is reading an excerpt from To Kill a Mockingbird. Those kind of summary statements are fine because that's actual evidence from the classroom. Some other things that are completely fine are things that are posted in the classroom, or what task, text, or evidence are the students using in front of them. All of that would be fine to make the notations of. What artifacts are students actually producing? Where did the teacher's movement? And that's really more about the circulation of the teacher. So if the teacher's moving around, checking papers as he or she goes, then that's also evidence. So those kind of things can actually be notated. And last but not least, there's a quantitative
portion at the very, very bottom, if you look at the last bullet that says the number of students compared to the total. So for example, like how many students actually responded to the question the teacher asked, or how many students out of the population are actually visited by the teacher. So say for example that if I'm the teacher in the particular classroom, if I go around and check on you guys, how many of the 50 in this room did I actually get to? And that would just be that quantitative amount. So what we're going to do with this sheet is the following. You're actually going to get to see a video right now. It was one of our middle school science teachers in science classrooms. And what I want you to do is consider, just based on this sheet, just based on the overall summary that we just went over, and the sheet itself, I want you to watch this video. And as you're watching, I want you to consider just in the back of your mind, those things that she kind of encapsulated or talked about, what would be useful if I were actually scripting this video? Because you guys are not being asked to script at this time. You're just watching just to see what would be helpful or useful if you were the person creating this evidence. Does anybody have any questions about what's being asked of you to do? Okay, then we're going to go ahead and watch Sarah Gerard's video. It's going to be about 4.5 minutes, and we're just watching, considering what it is that we would be scripting if we were scripting for this video.
Raise your hand side just so we can get if you've ever scripted on this, done this side of this form. Awesome. Okay, we do have more than half. That's awesome. Yeah. Great.
Okay, once you finish your final sketch demonstration, you are finished with the foldable, and we are going to do one last activity for the day. So I will see when I see all pencils down that we are ready to begin that activity. You should be able to explain to me the difference between conduction, convection, and radiation. Are we starting to get a few ideas about what the difference is? Yep. Wonderful. What's the second part of the learning target? Who wants to read that last sentence or the last part of that sentence for us? Emma, thank you.
Identify examples of each type.
Wonderful. Now that we've discussed them, we wrote down a definition, we looked at some demonstrations and sketched what those demonstrations look like. We're ready now to move on and discuss some examples of each kind. This was a demonstration example, but it's not often that you're going to sit at home playing with a heat lamp on an ice cube, right? I mean, I know it sounds like a great Saturday night, but we want to know what all of this means for real events in our real lives that we see day to day. So I'm going to pass out a group of little cards with pictures to each table of 4 of you. This table, all the way down, is working together today as one group. So you guys are only going to be at this table. You have nothing to do with that table today. This table is all working together over here. So again, you're going to have nothing to do with that side today. At each table, you should see 3 posters. One is labeled radiation, one convection, and one conduction. With your table of 4, I'm going to drop off a baggie that has example cards that you will need to get up as a group and walk up and down your posters, correctly placing each example on the poster that you think it fits most accurately. Make sense? Mm-hmm. At the end, when you have placed all of your cards, you're going to go back to your seat. You guys are going to, for example, look at your radiation poster, and we're going to compare with the other side of the room and see if we got the same answers or not. Okay? So when you get your baggie, the 3 of you are going to work together with this baggie. The 4 of you will work with this one. The 3 of you will work with this one. Look at your cards, get up, and place them on the correct poster at your table.
Yeah.
If you're touching it. How do you know it still has to do with density?
Because it's going in a cycle.
Okay, so you see a cycle, right? What's probably the arrows going up indicating?
Heat.
Heat, why? What do we know about the density of heat? Things that have a lot of thermal energy.
It's going to rise.
That it rises. So this is probably what kind of air?
Cold.
Cold. This one doesn't have a cycle. How'd you know it was convection if there's no arrows?
Because it has heat because of the fire.
Okay, so we see heat, but we know heat has to do with all of them, right?
Heat's going up into the
Yeah, so it goes up.
Okay, so what does that tell us about the density of the air in the balloon compared to the density outside?
That it's like gathering around each other and it's trying to go up. And it's trying
Okay,
to, like,
what do you mean lighter? What's a more scientific way of saying the air is lighter?
Less density.
Less density, you got it. Same thing here, right? You can see the word density, but how do you know? Even if I didn't have the word density, what gives you a clue that that has to be convection?
Because there's a heat lamp on the bottom.
Okay.
And then when it gets hot, it goes to the top, and when it cools down from the top, it goes back
So
to
you
the
see
bottom.
the rising and falling. Excellent, good work.
Ironing a shirt,
Do we have it? 1 for 1, go ahead.
burning your hand on a hot cup of coffee,
Do we have it? 2 for 2,
baking cooks in a skillet on the stove,
3 for 3.
an ice cube melts in your hand.
Did you have any extras that they did not? Nope. So exact same answers. Yep. Wonderful. Conduction looks good so far. Radiation group. Who wants to read them? One at a time. Who has radiation here? Okay, you guys are listening to check.
Keeping warm by a campfire,
Got it? 1 for 1,
microwave oven cooking food through waves,
2 for 2,
sun heating the sand,
3 for 3,
getting sunburned,
4 for 4,
space heater heating a room,
5 for 5. Any others they did not say? So identical answers? All right, last group, convection group. You guys are going to read what you had. You guys are checking. Go ahead.
So you've had about 4 to 5 minutes of video to watch from Sarah Gerard's 6th grade science class. At this point, what I'd like you to do on this sheet is make some notes based on what you think some of this methodology would have been that you would have used if you had been scripting. So just take about a minute and consider that. For most of you, you've scripted before, so that shouldn't be anything new. What kinds of methodologies would you have used in the process if you had been scripting for this particular teacher? Start a conversation with your elbow partner or partners about what methodologies you think would have been most effective to have used while scripting this particular teacher and her activity in the classroom. Go ahead and start that conversation. Okay, I'd like to do a quick debrief across the room. What I loved as I was circulating was how you were making notes about the things that you actually did see in her classroom, like her posters on convection and conduction, how you noticed that she was formatively assessing students, how many students she had talked to, things like that. You were actually doing some of the scripting process in your notes. But between you and your partners, what did anyone see that you thought was important based on just the notes for accurately recording descriptive evidence? Things that you thought would be important to note that you and your partner discussed.
During that video clip, we only actually saw her interact with 3 or 4 students.
Okay. So that's important to note, correct? Because that's a quantitative amount based on the number of the students in the classroom. Thank you. What else? Yes?
And then talking with other students, we noticed, at the very end when she was working, she spent a lot of time with that one group going over each item, which was great. But at that time, what's everybody else doing? There was a lot of downtime for the other students since they were all finished as well.
Okay, so that would be a good place then, right, to put that summary statement like was with group number 4, 4 minutes, blah to blah. And that's absolutely one of those great things that you could write down in the script. Any other thing that you could have used to, yes, thank you.
That she forced the kids to be in a group. She didn't waste any time letting the kids choose.
Okay, she had already pre-selected the groups, correct? And got them already grouped, and group 1 did not speak to group 2. Okay, great. Anything else? Yes?
I said that the artifact, like there was an actual, at the end, each kid got certain items, so they were responsible, even though the 3 groups were put in on one poster, she knew which ones belonged to which group.
And I love that. You made note of the actual artifact that the students were making. Correct, that's great. So we're going to go ahead and transition now into our next section, and Jenny.
You didn't address the script at all.
Oh yeah, I totally skipped a section. I'm so sorry. Yes, totally. You guys have already been handed this out. Okay, apologies. So you have one of these in your hand, other than Miss Losi that I stole hers. What I'd like you to do is this. Okay, this is an actual script that we made based on this video. And we'd like you to look over it, reading the script on the left-hand side. Read through that, and as you're reading, consider the kinds of descriptive evidence that we wrote for this particular script in comparison to the notes and what you were thinking. So go ahead and take a couple of minutes to read through that, making any notations about the scripting that was actually done for this video.
Okay, so a couple of things to clarify is, one, how important it is to script, because what you're trying to do is, before you do any commenting on what you saw relative to the quality instruction elements, is first capturing what it is, what happened, and then you go, okay, where did I see things that were really excellent, and specifically, how can I reinforce that practice? And where did I see something I could recommend that would enhance one of the elements? But that can't happen without the stuff on the left. But the fun part is, it never looks like that. It looks like that. That's mine for this very 5 minutes. And by the way, we should clarify that you'll be doing this for 15 minutes. So we have really set as a basic standard, right, that when we go in to the instructional parts of the Plan of Excellence visits, we stay in the room for 15 minutes and we script. And during that time, there's no feedback. There's no, I've seen a few minutes, so I'll start writing feedback. No, because it's imperative you not miss things, right? So I don't want to make it seem heavy, but it is kind of a pain, right? Because if you have your head down and you're writing T and Fs, you're writing T and S's, right? You're just listening. Oh, that was teacher said this, student said this. You might miss where she moved. You might miss something else that happened that would have taken your eyes off your paper and up viewing instruction. There's really not an easy way, so as Missy went with you through the various methods, it's not saying you just do one of those. And hopefully you'll see, maybe take a look right now, and where do you see varying methods of recording what happened? What methods did you see in the pretty typed example? What did the scripter do to try to get an economically kind of phrased encapsulation of what happened? Yes?
Instead of just constantly doing like the teacher-student scripting, when there was a specific like group setting, they just to let them know, oh, this is a small group discussion, here's what happened, and like kind of like broke it up or chunked what happened.
Okay, so you'll see in there's some annotation that says, hey, it's switched to a small group discussion, and here's what happened there, and then it was a whole group debrief. Great. What else did you see the scripter do? What other methods did you see? I mean, there's the obvious one, right? What were you going to say?
I was going to say maybe like where she marked the student one, did the student two, did the...
So what do you think that means that it says S1, S2, S3, S4, S5? That it was a different student. That's been a challenge, right? What if you just say S and it's the same kid the entire time? So that's a little thing we've learned to try to indicate that. And then, of course, there's S and T. So I just wanted to share with you the significance of it and recognize, did that scripter get every single word the kid said? Did that scripter get every single word the teacher said? No, everybody shake. By a show of hands, how many of you think that this is a fair representation of what happened, even though we just all agreed it's not every single thing? Raise your hand if you think it's fair, as in they didn't miss anything big. Okay, your hands up there that's the best we can do and you can do. When you're in there for 15 minutes, super active classroom, there might be, in that particular case, there were 8 groups going at the same time. So it is a challenge, but we just want you to appreciate we're working with leadership all the time on the significance of doing that, right? Because doing your very best in there to stay in the moment and record using these varying methods as best as you can. This left side really makes the stuff that happens over here also fair, and from the teacher's perspective, also useful. Because there'll be evidence that it is indeed a strength, and there'll be evidence that there is a suggestion that would be useful. Any questions about that before we go on to more active scripting for you? Yes. So I don't actually have any that I made that we had double-sided. The back is just a bunch of lines. So when you're doing it, you'd flip and do your best. And that's a really good question, because maybe behind that some is, don't you kind of get fatigued? You know? You guys didn't have to do it that time, but oh, it's coming. We got a 4-minute and 57-second when you're going to actually have to fully script, and that's why we wanted to practice first. But it's, again, do your best. That's why we're showing these methodologies, because we had principals, over these last 3 years that we've been doing this process, it's kind of maddening if you're in there for 20 minutes and you're trying to capture every single word and everything that happened. You know, if you say, I'm just going to look around the room and capture a bunch of things, then you miss what people said. If you go, I'm just going to capture what people said, then, so you just have to recognize, I'm going to stop with the said for a second. I'll miss a few of those, but I'm going to capture what the kids are actually working on. I'm going to say what it is. So it's kind of a very organic process, and that's why we thought practicing first would help. Great. Any other questions? Okay. We'll dive into our next portion.
Okay, so that was a pretty good segue to what we're going to look at now. So you guys have all had experience with this form. Do you know where it came from? I just want to share a little bit of the history behind this. So basically over the last 3 or 4, maybe 5 years, principals in Kenton County have thought about what they saw in Kenton County classrooms that were really strong and tried to articulate it. Okay, and that's where these 4 indicator areas came from of meaningful engagement, formative assessment, accountable talk, and effective collaborative learning. And so this is, we've used this, you all have become familiar with this, but one of the things that we've seen, and it's become really evident, especially in these school visits, is that when you're scripting and when you're giving feedback, even though this looks very linear, we know that in instruction, it's not at all. So it's not like you say, okay, well, I'm going to do meaningful engagement now. Okay, done. Now I'm going to move to formative assessment, and you know, it's not like that. You move in between the different areas quite often. And so we wanted to create a resource that would help teachers see that interplay that we observed in classrooms in all these visits. And that went across grade levels, so elementary, middle, high, it went across contents. And we also wanted to give a resource that would help you see the interplay among these bullets. Okay? So that's where this came from here. So it's really the same information. You'll see as you look at this, the language is pretty similar. We do cite the different areas, meaningful engagement, ME, FA is formative assessment, et cetera. Okay? So what I want you to do is take a minute to look at this individually. As you do, I want you to annotate with any questions that you have about anything that needs to be clarified. I want you to annotate anything that you're like, oh, I didn't really think about it that way. So any ahas that you have as well. So I'm going to give you about 2 minutes to do that individually. And please annotate on here so we can see where your thinking's headed. As you're looking at this green sheet, please mark with any ahas and any questions, anything you need clarified. About 1 minute, turn to your elbow partner and go ahead and share a few things that you found that were interesting to you as ahas, and we'll address the questions as a group if you have any. So if I can get some volunteers, I'd like to go ahead and debrief a little bit of what you were thinking. So first of all, was there anybody who had a question that they needed clarified on any of these? Yes?
If you have, if this teacher uses responses from all students to adapt instruction, I guess it depends on what type of formative assessment that you're getting, but could that be a accountable talk as well?
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah, so depending on what you're doing to adapt instruction, so if you're maybe you're putting up misconceptions that you observed and then engaging in a class discussion around those, absolutely and there's a lot of other ways that could. So yeah, we'll make sure that we add that to that. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, what about ahas?
We noticed that formative assessment was on there 3 times.
Absolutely. So formative assessment, really a part of every bullet once the kids have the task or the text problem. And so again, that's noting that cyclical part of it and that you're really kind of moving in between the bullets and the indicators. Yes?
I said that you don't jump just from teacher to the students collaborating, they have to have individual time first.
Yeah,
There's no direct line there because they need to have their own work to bring to the group.
That's a great, did everybody hear what she said? That's a great point, just of how important it is for students to have that individual task with a product and time before moving to collaboration. Other comments or ahas? Yes?
I think the word all.
Yeah. That's a biggie, isn't it? Because I think that if we look at a lot of instruction, most of the time we're doing these things with some kids or most kids, but all kids, wow, kind of takes it to the next level. And that really connects with what Julia just brought up of giving kids individual time with a product before they move to that collaboration, because that gives you some evidence of what they can or can't do. If they have that individual time with a product, then you can see exactly, you know, where their issues are, what they're able to do, what they aren't before they start collaborating or you move to full class discussion. Yes, ma'am?
What about gradual release?
What about gradual release? So tell me more about what you're thinking.
I do, we do, you do.
Okay, so how could that fit with this?
Thank you. Like they're collaborating first.
Okay.
In that instance, before they're doing their individual product.
But here they're doing the you do before we do the we do, is the way we were looking at it. Is that what you're talking about, Danielle?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're saying you're moving from full class.
Model to scaffolding to independent. So like our.
So I think what you can think about is it's not always that you're having them do a whole task by themselves. So it might be that, you know, you're modeling something. And then the next part you might say, okay, our first step, what do we think we need to do first? Okay, try that part, 30 seconds. You see what I mean? So it's not like saying, okay, totally everything, but I think in bits. Because if you do that, then you can see exactly, are they okay with that portion? Are they not okay? Does that help at all?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think though, like at our school, we're from the same school, like we give them the productive struggle first.
Yeah.
Like,
Okay.
and they'll learn, sometimes they learn better from each other. So we'll say, you guys go, and if you have any questions, like in my classroom, they can't even ask me if they have a question until they've asked.
So let me ask you this. What about do you give time before they do that for kids to just think?
Well, we do like the I do, she said, where we model, and sometimes we do a central question where they have a question, they have to think about it, and they have time to talk about it with the neighbor, but it's not necessarily maybe the nitty-gritty part of learning how to do the math steps or whatnot. But
So I might think about just how could you maybe incorporate that, because sometimes you have that quiet kid, or I will admit this is the type of person I am, I need time to process. If you tell me, like working with these people, sometimes they drive me nuts because they're ELA people and they think while they talk. I'm not like that. I need to think and then I need to talk. So sometimes I'm like, would you guys just, just shut up for a minute and let me just look at this and get my thoughts together. So that's where I would think, you know, I think you can have a lot of different variations of this, but having that individual product is critical. Kids have to have something to bring to the table.
Well,
I think your discussions will get.
Do part of it, like where they work with their group.
Okay.
Like Eric said, where they're
Well,
they're,
the groupings are intentional too.
Right.
Right.
So you're gonna pair those kids that
Uh-huh.
are the same.
so they're able to, like, if they have questions, if they're kind of shy, yeah, like Danielle said, you're pairing them with a group where you know they're going to kind of work well with them. And then
Absolutely.
they give us the product at the you do part.
Okay.
That's just kind of like, we noticed that was.
Yeah, that sometimes it might be flip-flop depending on the situation. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Too on the level as well, like.
I think it depends on, over on the left, you'll see the square that says number of cycles and duration of the cycle depends on the complexity of the task. So if it's a discrete task and you need it from every kid, then that might be maybe not the we do part. If it's a really large one that is the we do is, I'm just thinking in the context of writing. If it's, I do a sample of a lead paragraph, we do, I ask you to work on it, and then I want to see your lead paragraph. If that lead paragraph can't be just a replication of what they did in their group, they actually have to dive in, then I would say that's just an extended task. But if it's a math problem, a single one that's not super complex, it doesn't seem like that would fit the cycle so that you could get a measure from every kid. Does that help about the size of the task, the complexity of the task?
It's complex, a lot to think about. Okay? All right, so with that said, what we want to do is go ahead and transition to the next part. We'll be coming back to this and kind of putting these pieces together, but for right now, we're going to transition to a video.
Sure. Yeah. So, as Jenny mentioned, this came out of observation of high quality instruction. So this didn't come from us. This came from when we see instruction that's nailing the elements, how does it go? And it goes like this. That's from you all, because we're really just observing in Kenton County schools. We see this cycle replicated over and over again from class to class and within a given class when instruction is really strong in all 4 elements. Okay? So I think that's really important. This is the cycle that matches, we're like, what did that teacher do that they nailed the elements so clearly? And we see that it's a cycle of task. All kids are challenged to think and do. They have a product, right? You're seeing the first 2 elements of the task. Maybe they collaborate or don't, but the teacher uses measures from all or most of those kids to adapt and decide what to do next. That one can happen too, but these 3, moving over and over again in a class with short and long tasks, is what has really identified when we see the elements working together really well. Okay? So that's just been over time with these visits and over the last 3 years. So
This was created by us.
yes,
Our district.
yes. Everything you see actually was created by our district. We haven't given you one thing that wasn't created by leadership and interaction with teachers and instruction in this district. And we're pretty proud of that because it's your stuff, our stuff. We're basically saying the model of great teaching comes from what we see when our teachers, and lots of them, are doing great teaching. Great question. Okay, so what we're going to do now, though, is we're going to show you a video. It's 5 minutes long that captures a typical kind of instruction that we see relative to the cycle of instruction. Okay? So what we want you to do is first, because you all, some of you, many of you had raised your hands that you're scripting, but perhaps you haven't gone out and seen many different classrooms, and I should just reiterate here, when you do a Plan of Excellence walk, if you're on one, you'll typically see a whole department. If you go to Dixie Heights High School on February 7th, I don't think we're going to get you guys involved that soon, but you'll see 11 English teachers in one day, right? You'll see them each for 15 minutes. So I'm just bringing that up to tell you, out of this massive amount of visits that we've done, the video you're about to see conveys a very common kind of instruction that we see. Okay? So I want to make that clear across middle and high school, middle, elementary, and high school. We've done 7 visits, 6 visits. The 7th one's coming up. And so this represents a common kind of instruction we've seen. So you're going to have to script. Get your script fingers ready. You'll be bobbing up and down. Sometimes you'll have to think and write stuff, but then you'll want to watch. This is that difficult situation. But we got to get you used to it since you'll be doing it for a little bit longer time. So I think it's 4 minutes and 30 seconds. Script first. Don't write anything except trying to capture what actually happened in class with no feedback or anything for the next 4 minutes and something. Okay? Everybody ready? Thumbs up if you're ready to script, pen in hand. You use those methodologies that we showed you in your scripting practice where you just had to think about it, but now you're doing it. Now your paper's going to look like my crazy paper.
We're going to talk about some of the themes of the book today. Okay? I'm going to read you a section. I want you to guess what one of the themes of the book is. People moved slowly then. They ambled across the square, shuffled in and out of the stores around it, took their time about everything. A day was 24 hours long, but it seemed longer. There was no hurry, for there was nowhere to go, nothing to buy, and no money to buy it with. Nothing to see outside of the boundaries of Macomb County. But it was a time of vague optimism for some of the people. Macomb County had recently been told that it had nothing to fear but fear itself.
So fear.
What was the theme?
Fear.
Fear. Good. All right. So there are lots of people in this book who have fears, right? Let's talk about some of the people in the book who might be afraid of things. Let's get the names down.
Bob, Jen.
Mom. Good. Jen. Who else?
Atticus.
Atticus.
Boo.
Who said boo?
Good.
Bob Yule's daughter, Nayella.
She doesn't have the right to fear. She's just like.
All right. So let's start with Helen and Tom. They have similar fears, right? What do you think Helen and Tom are afraid of? Being killed. Good. So persecution. Remember? Okay. They're afraid of the white people of Macomb County. What is Bob Yule afraid of?
Being publicly disgraced. Which is what happened.
What else is he afraid of?
He is afraid of blood.
Good. So what do we know about Tom? What does he look like physically?
He's a well-built man, but
He's a cripple, right? He's a crippled black man, so why are people afraid of him?
because he's strong.
They don't want to feel sorry for him?
Because they can't really.
Because they can't
Yeah, like
hurt
it's,
him, like,
he's more power than the people.
why does he have more power?
It's bad to kill a couple places and almost to kill Mockingbird.
Good, it's a sin to kill. It would be a sin to hurt him, right? But why are people afraid of Tom Robinson? Why are people afraid of a black man? Doesn't he seem like he would be the least amount of power? So why is Bob Dole afraid of him?
Because it's like obvious to everybody that Tom didn't do it. But
So what would the fear be?
the fear was that like, are we really gonna put a crippled black man?
Good. That a black man could humiliate a white man, right? And what would that do to the social system in Macomb County? Good. The social system of Macomb County would collapse. Okay. So the people of Macomb County have nothing to fear but fear itself. But what is their fear? That Macomb County will no longer exist as they know it. So what are they afraid of? Change. Good. They're afraid of change. Who else is afraid of change? Why is Atticus afraid of change?
Because he doesn't want Tom to that.
How would that be changed?
It doesn't want change.
So Atticus wants change. Who does he want to change?
Yeah, like the society to change.
Good. You want society to be changed. What is his fear for his children?
That they will grow up to be like the Eagles.
Good. He says there's a disease, right? The usual. Good. The usual disease of Macomb County. What is the usual disease of Macomb County?
Racism.
Racism. So what does Atticus not want? Doesn't want his children to be racist.
So what we'd like you to do is this, okay? I'm the kind of person that likes to see something first and then actually script, but of course that's not real for a classroom visit. You're going to go in and you're going to see it live and you're going to have to script it live. But what I'd like you to do is just take a few seconds to look through your notes and see if there's anything you need to kind of finish up, just so it makes sense to someone other than you. Because remember, if you were scripting, this would be going back, if you were an administrator, back to the teachers themselves when you visited the classrooms. Now, if you're going on the district walks, obviously that would not be what's happening. But if you were an administrator and if you were giving this back to a teacher, just take a couple seconds and see if there's anything else that you want to add or eliminate, clarify, exactly, just based on your notes. Okay, so as we finish that up, I'd like to take you to the center now of the form. And for those of you that haven't scripted before, you can see that the indicators are listed there, beginning with meaningful engagement and then descending into formative assessment, accountable talk, and collaborative learning. For the purpose of today, we're going to focus on the first 2 blocks only with meaningful engagement and formative assessment. But I'd like to take you to the ahas and questions that you guys pointed out earlier, okay? Because you noticed on the cycle of instruction on your green sheet, you made the notation about the word all and how important it is that all students are engaged, that all students are doing this, that all students are being accountable to rigorous thinking. So what I'd like you to do is go ahead in the box that says meaningful engagement, add the word all before those bullets, to remind yourself, even though it's not on this form, but that is asking about all students in response to meaningful engagement. Okay, now that you have all notated there, I want you to consider the following. Great, thank you. For each one of the bullets in meaningful engagement, so the first 3, and formative assessment, the next 3, for a total of 6. Individually, I'd like you to do the following. I want you to mark the text based on the evidence that you provided on the left-hand side of your sheet. If you saw strong implementation of the bullet itself, I want you to use a plus symbol. If you saw little or no implementation of the bullet, I want you to use a minus sign. And if you saw some implementation, but it needs a tweak or needs something done, then I want you to use a delta or a triangle symbol for that particular bullet. Does anybody have any questions about what your task is before you begin? Yes.
We would mark these in the feedback box, the pluses, or over here by our evidence?
That's a great question. Either's fine with me. It looks like there's plenty of space in the box itself, so feel free to write it just at the end of the indicator. That would be great.
So you don't want any written feedback?
No, we're not going to the feedback part yet. Hopefully all of you have a mark. Now you're going to have an opportunity to talk to your elbow partner or partners. What we'd like is for you to come to a common consensus with adjacent scores. So if one of you has the bullet as a plus and one of you has a minus, you have to work it out between the 2 of you. If it's a delta, one of you have a delta and one have a minus, that's okay because that's an adjacent score. But I want you to have the conversation to come to a consensus about the scores and why you marked the bullets the way that you did and why. Does anybody have any questions about your next task? Okay, go ahead and start your conversations.
That's my only question. Is there a group, either partnership or triad it looks like we had, that needed to reach consensus because at first you had some pluses / minuses? Because that's the only place where you're not adjacent. Is it somebody had a plus, somebody else had a minus? Did any group start that way with any of the 6 bullets? Could you share which bullet?
We said,
Student products demonstrate understanding.
Everybody, that's the 3rd bullet under meaningful engagement. Check it out. One of these 2 ladies had a plus and one had a minus. Did you reach consensus?
we went in the middle.
Okay, so you said delta. Could you share just one thing that allowed you to say, whoever had it wasn't there at all to say I see a scrap, and whoever said plus to say yes, something's missing?
Well, when I think product, I think kids doing something, and she brought up that the teacher was at least putting the stuff on the board, so that's why I went to the middle.
And we felt like it could have been tweaked by having them writing what the class comes. They're basically, I see that as a product. Their smartboard, their notes that she was making is a product. but what were the kids doing, which is what she was saying, what were the
Right.
students doing? So a way to tweak that come in the middle
Great.
would be to have them
Great.
coming together to write that down.
So if you look at that one, it sounded like the tweak was around, do some student products demonstrate understanding? The products that could get on the board were from students, but from what portion of the students? And did every kid in the room contribute to that product? And so that's great. Did you guys have a similar move? Yeah, you're right there. Yeah, did you have the same kind of situation?
I think you were adding the phraseology about the all.
Okay.
It was the importance of the all.
Okay, great.
That was
Great.
That was our B.
Great. And that is the challenge, right? And when you're looking at this, right, it's important to recognize, as many of you did, because I did not see many people had negative 6 times, because it says any implementation of the bullet but requires a tweak, right? That we do see scraps of it, and we saw lots of deltas. And what does that tell you, right? If it's a delta, there's opportunity for what?
For improvement.
Most people, I could hear you saying it. If she just, why didn't she just? And that's where we're headed next.
Okay, so we're going to take you back to the cycle, because as you can see from that video, and when you start thinking about each of the, meaningful engagement, formative assessment, et cetera, when you think about them in silos, it's really hard to figure out, okay, if we're going to give this teacher an idea, which box does it go in, right? Okay, and so if you think about the cycle as kind of showing the interplay again, it just makes it a little bit easier to think about that. So what I want you to do, we know that there were some good things in that. The teacher was well prepared. Her questions weren't bad. The students she was enthusiastic. Some of the students were enthusiastic. They were compliant. There were some good things going on. But we also know that, as most of you indicated, there was something that needed to be tweaked. So what I want you to do is I want you to go back to this cycle, and I want you to think about individually, just for 1 minute. I want you to put a star next to which bubble do you think needs the tweak. So it looks like most people have chosen, if not all, have chosen the same bubble, okay? And the reason why we wanted to stick to one bubble is because, think about it, when you're teaching, if somebody comes in and gives you feedback, and they give you feedback in all these different areas, how do you know which one really would have made the most difference? Where do where you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck, okay? So at this point, what I want you to do is, around that bubble that you wrote, or that you starred, I want you to think about what's the most important adjustment that that teacher could have made. And I want you to be specific, okay? You saw the context of the lesson. I'm not an ELA person, but I could give her a suggestion about how she could better meet that specific bullet. You want to be specific within the context of the lesson. What could she have adjusted? What would have been the most important adjustment to make so that the cycle didn't break down in that part? Okay? So I'm going to give you about 2 minutes to write that piece of information. You can just write it right next to the bubble.
Bullets that matches a bubble.
Nope, you're just going, let me repeat that. You're just going to be on this cycle. You're figuring out which bubble did it initially break down. And you're trying to provide the most important adjustment that you think that teacher could have made, and be specific within the lesson. So we're just sticking with this right now, as opposed to going back to the feedback form, because I think it's a little bit easier to think across indicators on here. Make sense?
To get that basic idea about where the cycle broke down strategically, in other words, if you address this place, maybe the rest of the cycle would get back in line, and then you even had a suggestion for doing that. I'm going to go away from the specific task just for a second to let you know how the Plan of Excellence visits work. After you would have done this, as in what you've learned and practiced so far today, you're in a room for 15 minutes and you script, okay? You come out of that room, and you would have an opportunity either after that 15 minutes to sit down and do the very work you just did, which is indicating where do you see real strengths, which you mark with pluses, and where do you see a place for a suggestion that would be important in moving instruction in that particular class, right? Especially moving forward. If you have a suggestion that that same kind of lesson with that same teacher would work. So that's how it'll happen. But you will not be giving specific feedback to the teacher. You'll be doing this form where you script, and then you'll be writing feedback here, okay? And so if Adrienne and I are on a team looking at all of Dixie's English department, we would have seen all 11 teachers and done that work, and at the end, we would together write what we see as strengths and suggestions for the department. Does that make sense? I just wanted to get that in now. I don't know how soon, if you guys will be doing any soon or later, but I do want you to understand that's the process. It's one quick thing, then I'll answer your question. It's very different for you doing this for a colleague because you're giving feedback just to that one teacher. And it goes straight to them, right? But we're looking for strengths and suggestions across the department and then across the school. So I just want to make sure you understand that difference before we move forward with what I'm going to ask you to do next. Yes, question. It has been 2 to 3 folks on a team so far. That may be expanded when we add teachers. So I think that model is open. It might be, as of now, our team would be 2 or 3 people, and those same 3 people went into every single classroom. Perhaps with teachers added, an department of 11, you could have 2 teams of 2 or 2 teams of 3, so you don't have an entourage of 6 people coming into a classroom. And maybe that could be how it works, but we haven't worked out that model yet. We're just really excited to have teachers join us. Okay? Yes?
When you go in teams, does everybody look for all of these indicators? Or is like certain people on certain teams looking for a
Great question. He just asked, when you go in, do certain people look for certain things? Do you look for all of these things? That's why the scripting is so critical, because when you go in, you hold all of that in abeyance. I'm not thinking about it. You go in and script what you see. Because what you see might just be the meaningful engagement part, depending on the length of the task, the complexity of the task, and when you're in there. And we've really struggled with that over the time we've been using this is, if you're in there for 15 minutes, it's not a fair expectation to see 16 bullets fully implemented. So you will give feedback on what you saw, but what we feel really strongly about is there should be quality, meaningful engagement, and formative assessment to some degree, no matter how long you're in there. Is that fair? That's what we've kind of seen. And I think that's been where your feedback has been for what you saw in 4 minutes and 30 seconds. Great questions. So on to the task is this. So you have starred the place where the bubble that broke down in the cycle, and you've written yourself a note of the kind of thing you think you'd suggest to fix it. This next part is on, can I borrow that for a second? Mm-hmm. So here, what we want you to do is with a partner or the group of 3 that you've been working with, we want you to really work at crafting one piece of feedback, a suggestion that would be phrased to the teacher to address this need. So you put in there, maybe you already phrased what you had on your green sheet like that, but here are some things that are really important. You should stop somewhere and have kids write something down is not the kind of specificity we want. Where in the lesson you saw should she have stopped, and what kind of things should she have asked them to write down? You all know from getting this feedback, that's the feedback that's useful to you. So this is a great audience. I'll just put it this way. We want you to craft a piece of feedback to address the need that you've just identified with your star and pre-write that would be the kind of feedback you would want and need as a teacher. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So you can do that with a partnership or with the 3 of you, but I would like you to do it on this page on the right side. Yes?
Some of the feedback that I look for is often like formed in a question. Is that appropriate, or is it?
In this particular case, definitely not, because if you phrase a question, it seems to start a conversation that you won't be there to have.
Yes.
It's a little up in the air if it's in your own building and it's leadership. If it leads to a conversation, yes, but I'd say if it's a question that doesn't lead to a conversation, what's the point? But great question. In this case, what you're going to be doing, you will not get to talk with the teacher, so no questions. Any other questions? Is that it? Okay, get to it.
One thing, if you find that your piece of feedback doesn't fit just under meaningful engagement or just under formative assessment, just cross those out and let it go across. It's
Right.
okay.
Yep. Great point. It doesn't matter which bullet it is, it's the key feedback. Everybody, here's the cycle. Which bubble did most of you put is the place where the cycle broke down? So we'll just do number 1, teacher provides appropriate tasks and a text. How many of you said you could only pick one, that was the place it broke down? A few, okay? That's certainly not a quorum, about 4 or 5 people. This one, how many? That's 1. Sorry. Anybody? Okay, it looks like with my pointing more accurately, we have 1. Okay? How many of you said this bullet? Raise your hand. Okay, we don't have to go any farther. So, and there's already been the conversation about all. So it seems to me the push is how do we suggest something to this teacher to get a product from all students? Is that fair? How many of you have, Missy's pointing to a group that has a specific recommendation to get to all? So, Missy, will you tell, I'm not sure which group?
We've already indicated.
Oh, okay.
I'll speak.
All right.
Okay, so I just said that, like, you could give all students a Post-it note and have them find text evidence to support one of the identified themes.
Okay.
Right after the story's read. So,
So if we think about this bullet, the task was a theme and how character interacted with the theme of fear.
Right.
And you're saying every kid gets a Post-it note and they have to put the character who's afraid and what they're afraid of. Would that get us to a response or a product from all students? That is certainly not the only way to do that, but it is specific in the context of the lesson and should be helpful, especially if the teacher's mode of operation is good or great questions offered chorally and taken chorally with no regard for if every kid is answering. Can we agree to that? There are probably a bunch of other methods, but that's fantastic. That's what we're looking for, is that kind of feedback, and we're trying to build that everywhere when we see instruction. The same with strengths. When you see a strength, if a teacher had done that, then it would say something like, excellent methodology, Post-it notes, to get a product from every student that demonstrates their understanding. So it works both ways. A strength or a suggestion, we're looking for just that. Specificity toward where the cycle broke down, what could fix it, and where the cycle is excellent, what really made it sing. Does that make sense? Yes.
So like, if this was like an actual visit that you went on, when you're giving the feedback, is it the first place in the cycle that broke down if we want the feedback? So like for us, we gave our feedback where it says students collaborate to share thinking and ideas, because that was a part of the lesson that was lacking that stood out to us, but it's not the first part. Like I would agree with feedback for the bubble above it. So what exactly kind of feedback? Is it right first part in the cycle or anywhere in the cycle?
That's a great question. And you can see we put the collaboration sort of in and out of the cycle. Because as we see it, if teachers give a good, appropriate task, all kids engage with it and produce a product, then the teacher can effectively, formatively assess. The next step in between there is a great thing. But there are problems if the teacher goes from task to collaboration, unless there's some intending within the collaboration to get a product from every kid. So to answer your question in the most simple way, I would say if the first 2 bullets don't happen, then it's really difficult to get to the next 2. So if the breakdown is in 2, then...
So is it fair to say that goes back to our AHAs and quality indicators when we're talking about a difference in, whether it be middle school or elementary or different schools? Like for us, that students collaborate, share thinking ideas would have come before the individual student product. So for us, the first bubble in the cycle when I'm teaching is different.
And again, I think it's really hard unless I would know the context of that, and I wouldn't judge. Yeah. The only thing I would say is, if the group work happens, is there an opportunity if these 4 people in the group, and you say group do it, and she guides it, that he doesn't engage? If that's the case, then you're not getting to the second bullet.
Fair enough.
Because it does say, yeah. And I wouldn't say that within the system that you use, that it doesn't happen where you do have a clear indication of understanding from all the kids. But if not, then that puts it out of the cycle as we've seen it.
But you were specifically looking there for the first part, is that where it breaks down?
Yep. All great questions. Okay. We hope you have a good sense of what we've learned from you and district-wide. We hope you have a better sense of what your experience will be if you go on one of the walks with us soon or next year or whenever. But we also hope you'll use this with each other to help move instruction where it needs to go and to help identify things that are happening that are really making this work. Okay.
I'll just add to what Gary said and wrap us up here. I know we're getting close to 5:30. If you can go back to the beginning, we talked about the purpose really was the vision of bringing teachers on board with these Plan of Excellence visits. But hopefully, as you're sitting here with that lens, you're also thinking about your classroom instruction and what you do every day with students. So we hope you found this meaningful. You may be swirling, if I am going on a visit soon, what's that look like, sound like exactly? We are planning on bringing teachers on board next month in February. We have 3 final full visits left this school year. And so know that if you're a part of one of those teams, you're joining a team of folks who have completed 6 or 7 visits already. So feel comfortable in that you're going to be a part of a team who will bring you on, help you with this process. It's natural to be a little unsure anytime you do something for the first time. So take comfort in that you're joining a team that's done this. You're going to be working with them. And again, there will be every visit like that, there's some additional calibration and just kind of reminding everybody of the process the morning of and throughout that visit. So don't be nervous is what we're trying to say. But also we're going to build on this and hopefully, the professional learning and just conversations that you're having here on a visit, when you get your feedback, if you're a school who's had a visit, it's been a win-win for all of us. Schools get a lot of great feedback, and we know that that's a lot, and you're filtering through that, but that's a win-win for the school receiving the feedback, but it's also a win-win for those of us on the visits. You're engaging with professional conversations with colleagues you may not always work with. You're learning when you're in those classrooms, and you're stealing good ideas, and the conversation then you have, it's just a win-win for everybody. And I know it can also be a little intimidating if you teach elementary, and you're walking in a high school classroom maybe, or vice versa. If you're a high school teacher and you're going into kindergarten, but good teaching is good teaching. So don't really focus on the content. If you're a chemistry teacher at high school and you're going into a first grade math classroom, just focus on these quality indicators of instruction and that cycle. Good teaching is good teaching. So again, we hope you found this meaningful. This is a process that we're going to continue to build and grow. So I know that you'll be hearing a lot more, not only from the district level, but in your schools. I know a lot of this work is taking place in PLCs, and similar to what you did today. Any final questions before we send you off into the snowflakes outside?
Because there will be a lot of these next year, and we had an even better turnout than we expected. We thought we might go one of these sessions. We had to expand to do 2 full sessions. So look around and see the number of people in here and double it. That's how many people we will have trained by the end of this week.
If you didn't sign in, come see me before you leave. We'll make sure you get your signature on this. Gary, did you have something else?
I just wanted to, we'd be remiss if we didn't tell you, one of our principals always asks us to do this. Because we're trying to be better teachers all the time and we learn from great teaching, which is that cycle, just a parting thing to think about, we designed the training you had today to be multiple iterations of that cycle. So maybe think about how what's in your hands, what you produced today, and how you worked was intentionally that cycle. And that's all. Thanks.
Thank you.